and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Indian Prime Minister Modi has flown to Washington to meet with President Trump. Can a bromance between these two scandal-hit populist leaders become a force to be reckoned with? As part of our series Trailblazing Hong Kong Women, I speak with Regina Ip, who just ran in the 2017 Hong Kong Chief Executive election. She tells me how far being brash and outspoken got her in Hong Kong politics. And we start from Washington, where the maiden meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is underway. The meeting has laid the groundwork for an expansion in ties, allaying some of the anxiety that relations had drifted apart.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Washington late Saturday. Indian Americans greeted Modi as he arrived for his first U.S. visit since Donald Trump became president. Trump tweeted greetings on the Prime Minister, saying looking forward to welcoming India's PM Modi to White House on Monday. Important strategic issues to discuss with a true friend. And Modi responded, "Thank you, President of the United States, for the warm personal welcome. Greatly look forward to my meeting and discussions with you." Before Modi's arrival, the White House gave the green light 22 Guardian unarmed drones for surveillance of the Indian Ocean. The deal could be worth some $2 billion. If the deal is approved by the U.S. Congress, it will be the first such sale to a non-NATO country. Economic issues will also be on the agenda. India is the 9th largest trading partner of the U.S., and Trump may look for ways to close the $24 billion a year trade deficit between the U.S. and India. On Sunday, the Prime Minister met with 21 business leaders, including the CEOs of Apple, Google and Microsoft. Modi told the CEOs that the growth of India presents a win-win partnership for everyone, and business leaders have a great opportunity to contribute to that. On Monday at the White House, there will be one-on-one meeting between Modi and Trump, and bigger meetings between the delegations, and a reception and working dinner. This is the first such dinner at the White House for a foreign leader with the new president, and the administration says this shows Trump's commitment to the U.S. relationship with India.
And what is on the table during the summit between Prime Minister Modi and U.S. President Donald Trump? We are joined in our Beijing studio, Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies here in Beijing. Welcome, sir. In New Delhi, India, we have Professor Madhav Nalapat, UNESCO Peace Chair and also Director of the Geopolitics and International Relations Department at the Medical University. Joining us in Washington, D.C., the United States, Richard Russell, Senior Advisor and host the Madhwani Chair in U.S.-India Policy Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome to all of the three of you, gentlemen. I want to begin with you, Mr. Russell. This is certainly going to be the first time the two meet, and yet how much can be achieved?
I think we're not going to be looking for maybe a lot of tangible achievements from this. President Trump's major priorities from his election and so far that we've seen since he took office, there isn't a lot of overlap in terms of the old agenda that we had with India. This one, they got to find what is the overlap in their main agendas, and why should the two countries continue the kind of engagement we've seen in recent years.
Do you agree with that, Professor Nalapat? Not much to expect concrete, and yet, visionary speaking, we're going to expect something.
Well, the fact is that on the American side, they have been downplaying expectations, and part of the reason, frankly, is that there are very few people in the Trump administration who are really favorable to Trump. I think many of them would be delighted if Trump were to fail. You have, for example, even among those who have been chosen for high-level positions, some of them are Romney people, some of them are McCain people, some of them are Bush people. There are very few Trump people. So I think, quite frankly, there's not really very much motivation to make this visit a success. But the point is, when these two very large countries, when the heads of government of these two large countries meet together, and there is a general expectation that nothing much is going to happen except some tea and coffee maybe being shared between them, I'm not entirely sure that, I hope that's not going to be accurate.
Okay, Professor Nalapat, when you are saying that, you have to provide your version of the answer. So besides teas and coffee, what will India offer on the afternoon tea table?
Well, the reality situation is that India is already very heavily networked with the United States so far as technology is concerned. Indian techies are very active in the United States, both citizens of the United States and citizens of India. India is now, from the point of view of defense cooperation, the largest number of exercises that are being conducted with any foreign country is happening between India and the United States. There is a very cordial relationship on defense, because there is a very clear understanding that the threats that the United States and India face are largely common. I mean, including, for example, terrorism. So there are very many common threats, and there are very many common opportunities. So that is what is really driving the closeness between these two countries.
Professor Nalapat would suggest you're not really putting your hearts and minds into how this president could be a success. What about that defense? What about the tech? What about the citizen-to-citizen exchanges? You're not thinking enough about U.S.-India relations. Mr. Russell, please respond.
Well, I think the real promise for India, both in terms of economic cooperation and defense cooperation, a lot of it lies in the future. So the question is, do U.S. officials, do they have the patience to wait for that future? So on defense, I think the Obama administration, particularly our defense secretary, Ash Carter, he was willing to create new programs to share technology and begin working collaboratively in new ways that we haven't done with any other country, without a direct expectation about what actions India would take in the future. We let India define that as they grow stronger. So can we have that patience today? I think with President Trump, you've seen him take NATO to task and other allies to task for not doing enough. They're on the field so much more in shared security interests than India is today. So the question is, do we have that patience to wait? Do we want to have the answer today? Do we want India to be more active, for instance, in the fights against ISIS, or do something more aggressive South China Sea with some of the instability we see there?
So what about those questions? Do you, sir, Mr. Russell?
I personally, I don't think India is ready to respond in a very definitive way right now. So for me, I think if we want to continue to make movement, we got to hold that question out there and say, we hope that India's rise is good for the United States, but for the United States not to define what that means. For India to act in its own interest with more strength. So I think it's dangerous for us to put something on the table, our vision about what that strength means in practice, but instead continue to working as we have towards a more ambiguous goal, but believing it's in our interest.
Let's see how it is going to turn out. It seems to be what Mr. Russell is suggesting. Mr. Yang here in Beijing. Okay, we heard from Professor Nalapat talking about the common threat and therefore the common opportunities. Both of them could sound familiar to our ears when you see U.S. and China. When the two sides were sitting together, they were also talking about the common threats and the common opportunities, which just concluded the strategic diplomacy dialogue, for example. So, Mr. Yang, are we going to see some kinds of proxy competition, let's just say, between India and China? Is the U.S. going to play leverage with that? Is China concerned about that? And is China going to see a different approach with the United States if India is taking a relatively unique approach? Mr. Yang, these are all very interesting questions. I have to throw it to you, a Chinese guest.
Well, Prime Minister Modi, this is the 5th time for Modi to visit the United States since he took the Prime Ministership. He paid 4 visits under Obama. And at that time, in my observation, there were indeed some intention from the United States to play the game, say, driving a wedge between China and India, the two great countries. However, in fact, that's a triangle relation, not a 2 versus 1. So by this time, Prime Minister Modi's visit, I think the priority should lies at keeping continuity of the good relationship with the United States, but avoiding falling the zero-sum game in the triangle against China. So
keeping the good side of the cooperation and the continuity of that relationship. How would you interpret that? What is, to you, the Chinese side, so-called the good side of the relationship between that two countries?
Frankly speaking, to many foreign politicians and the leaders, President Trump means great uncertainties. And first thing first, for every foreign top leader visitors, need to reduce uncertainties and increase the certainties. So that is the purpose, say, the continuity of the good relationship with the United States. And meanwhile, he will explore wide range of areas for cooperation, including the cooperation in the geopolitics, to strengthen India's status quo in that region.
Okay. Professor Nalapat, it's only fair that I pose this question to you. I mean, on the one hand, Prime Minister Modi is now rather anxious in a way to try to develop as fast as possible to have a relationship with Washington and President Trump. On the other hand, also, Prime Minister Modi was very enthusiastic in building this relationship with President Putin just a few weeks ago during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum back in Russia. So how do you read Prime Minister Modi's so-called balance, apparently, between these two countries, United States on the one hand, Russia on the other hand? Professor Nalapat.
Well, I'd like to point out that Russia has been a friend of India for 6 decades, a very reliable friend of India. And I think Vladimir Putin is regarded very highly in India, as highly as he's regarded by China. So there's no question of India sacrificing its good relationship with Russia for the United States. As Mr. Russell very clearly said, there are certain fields in which we can cooperate. There are certain areas in which we can differ. For example, on this whole question of Ukraine, India has been extremely silent on the Russian moves in Ukraine, because a lot of people in this part of the world believe that the Russians frankly were justified when they saw the aggressive expansion of NATO. So a lot of people here don't believe NATO has been a great success, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in South Asia. Frankly, NATO has not won a war. It's only made things worse. So there are a lot of differences between India and the United States. And I'd like to come back to my central point about Donald Trump. Donald Trump on the campaign trail was talking a very different language from the Donald Trump administration. So the administration of Donald Trump seems to resemble very little the Donald Trump of the campaign trail. I think many people in our country would be far more comfortable with the Donald Trump of the campaign trail, in which he goes in for a fresh kind of look at geopolitics, specifically the fact that Asia is way more important to the United States than Europe is. And in that context, I'd like to say, so far as China is concerned, we have much to gain from China, we have much to gain from the United States, and hopefully we can do this balance between the two.
Ambitious India, it is not rare at all in history. Mr. Russell, what about that? I mean, also for United States, is it smart to play, let's just say, the leverage as a tool between China and India?
I don't know that we're necessarily playing them off each other. I do think, the fact that this trip came up a little bit faster than I think many of us were expecting is partially due to the fact that I do think, the one area, as Professor Nalapat mentioned, that I think the Trump administration has moved furthest from campaign versus administration is with China. They came out of the gates very strongly critical, but have toned that down considerably. I think India, which feels that it's stepped out in a strategic partnership with the United States, and it is very much about China's rise and India's fears. But if the U.S. and China start to engage positively, then has India expended all that energy in recent years for very little? Because indeed the common challenge that we were working towards is no longer a challenge, that U.S.-China ties are starting to really kind of strengthen. So I don't know that we're trying to balance them off each other, but certainly in India's view, they look at the emergence of a stronger U.S.-China relationship, and that gives them pause. They need to find out, is this for real? Is it sustainable? Is it deep? And therefore, visits to Russia, visits to other places take on increased importance, because India is going to need other partners for access to technology, for investment, and for those kind of things that the United States have been.
Mr. Yang, interesting what Mr. Ross just said, because priority in politics, particularly in geopolitics, is always playing the most important role at different times. So, Mr. Yang, what do you think is the priority, as China sees it, of Washington and also of New Delhi. Meanwhile, what about China's priority? Will them, in a way, have a common ground? That takes a lot of political wisdom, doesn't it?
Well, maintaining leadership of the United States in this region for Washington, no matter it's a Democrats or Republican.
This region, you're talking about Asia-Pacific region,
Yeah,
you're
Asia.
talking about South Asia, which exactly are you referring to?
The Pan-Asia Pacific, including the Indian Ocean
I
area. Some Americans call it as Ocean, Indian Pacific Asia, let's say it. So U.S. want to keep their leadership over the vast, very promising region. That is top priority. And for India, rising international status quo as China, and China also want to keep the rising as a sustainable. That is the different top priority from the United States. And for the other two, they want to keep a balance, strategic balance between the big countries.
The balance between the big countries. But Mr. Yang, as a result of that, I mean, China and the United States at this point, DPRK is a big issue that facing the two countries and many others as well. So the two countries seem to have a very concrete common ground to work with. Meanwhile, the trade and economic ties, also one of the areas likely to have the two work closely together, particularly with the upcoming dialogue about that just in a month's time. So, Mr. Yang, at this point, when India is having this trip in Washington, what do you think is going to be China's expectation, and how will China communicate with both of these players during this process? Mr. Yang, very briefly.
The increasing ties between India and the U.S., but also cautious to watch whether or not such increased ties will produce complicated geopolitics effects in this region.
Right. Professor Nalapat, you know, it is not just the U.S. that is making the world go around, but rather India and China as well, and some of the other important countries. So with the BRICS summit, India included, China included, it's a nickname for the emerging economies. What does India have in mind in terms of developing some common consensus with the emerging ones? And how is that likely to play with India's agenda this time with the Prime Minister Modi inside Washington now?
Well, as Mr. Russell said, there is definitely a lot of engagement between the US and China. And I think there was a very good meeting between President Trump and President Xi. Our expectation is that the meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi will get off to an equally good start and an equally friendly start. Because as has been said in the, by our Chinese expert, I mean, today is the age of the Indo-Pacific. Yesterday it was the Atlantic age, that is post-1945. But today is the age of the Indo-Pacific. And what we want as a country is to ensure that we are taken seriously in this new age. And from that point of view, we would like the United States, we would like China to ensure that India be given the respect, the rights of any other large country, whether it's the UN Security Council, whether it's other international bodies. We would expect to be treated fairly, and we would expect that a country of India will be, in a sense, a part of this kind of architecture rather than kept out of it. So I think India's relations with China and the US will depend very clearly on their way of integrating India into a new architecture. The more respect is shown to India, the more respect India will show to the country showing that respect.
All right, Mr. Russell, you want to respond to that? What does that mean to the United States? I mean, India usually have a very long list of things that they want to be quote-unquote balanced about. Mr. Russell, is it in Washington's interest to make sure all of those lists will have these kinds of mission accomplished?
Yeah, well, I think with the meeting with President Xi, there were two primary objectives that the Trump administration wanted from that meeting. They wanted Beijing's increased cooperation on North Korea, but also they wanted to see a series of trade concessions where President Trump could walk away and say that this huge market, which has been difficult for some companies, is suddenly opened up for exports. And he got, certainly assurances on both fronts. So to compare that to the Modi summit, what does President Trump want from Prime Minister Modi? There is no security issue around the globe that I think that burns quite as brightly as North Korea. Maybe a stronger commitment of support for stability in Afghanistan. But Afghanistan is viewed as an old problem that I think they'd rather just kind of move on from and not pay as much attention to. Trade concessions would also be there because India is also a tough market for American firms. And there I think Prime Minister Modi has a little bit less flexibility than President Xi does. I think some of the areas that have caused tensions with the United States, things like intellectual property rights, manufacturing, local content rules, things like that, price controls on some medical devices, I think Prime Minister Modi has got less flexibility to move on those issues than President Xi did for the list of things that we brought up. So I think President Xi offered things that Trump wanted, and I think that's part of the reason the meeting went well. I think Modi's got a little bit less flexibility, so I'm not sure this is going to go off quite as well. I certainly hope it does, but I'm just not sure that Modi can bring quite the same number of things to the table that President Xi was able to.
Yang Xiyu, Matt Halfnalapat, and Richard Russell. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you to come on our program. As part of our series Trailblazing Hong Kong Women, I speak with legislator Regina Ip. She tells us how Hong Kong has changed 20 years since it returned to China. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. As we approach the 20th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to China, we have conducted a series of exclusive interviews with 3 trailblazing women from Hong Kong SAR. Regina Ip is one of them. She is the current chairperson of the New People's Party, as well as the first woman appointed as Secretary of Security in Hong Kong. Her support for Article 23 of the Hong Kong Basic Law regarding anti-subversion has been a source of controversy for her. She also has been criticized for her outspokenness and lack of diplomacy in speeches for some years. Now she has run for Chief Executive of Hong Kong for twice in her career. Although she has never got elected, she takes pride in running cost-efficient campaigns. She tried her best, as she said, she has learned the intricacies of politics.
I campaigned twice. 5 years ago, that wasn't a very serious attempt because I had only 10 days to prepare. This year I tried again, and that was a much more serious attempt. The contest, as usual, is very competitive, but this time I'm glad to say there are no black materials. There is no mudslinging and not much personal attacks, and that is a good thing.
What do you make of your own performance this time?
I tried my best, and the feedback is that I produced the most comprehensive policy platforms. I spent the least amount of money. So on the whole, I think my campaign was cost effective, even though I failed to get enough nominations.
Some suggesting rising concerns about the future of Hong Kong, given the different views about where its future lies. What do you make of it, Mrs. Yip? Not as a candidate this time, but rather as a Hong Kong citizen.
I think the greatest change is in our economic influence and our position in the country. In 20, 30 years ago, we monopolized the China trade. We were practically the sole channel for trade and investment in and out of the mainland. And we certainly contributed a lot to China's modernization. But now a lot of the mainland cities, particularly those in the Pearl River Delta, they are able to do what we have been doing. And actually, cities in the mainland are more innovative than Hong Kong, And although we are still the freest economy and most competitive by some accounts, our long-term competitiveness is questionable. And home prices have risen too much. The wealth gap has widened. So more anxiety in our society now than 20 years ago. But that's a global phenomenon.
It is a global phenomenon. And Mrs. Yip, you and some of the other elites in Hong Kong are concerned about that. But, you know, some of the Hong Kong people that I talk to on the streets seem to suggest that, you know, leave us alone, they say. We don't want to be that competitive. We just want to have an easy life.
There are people who say that the younger generation is becoming like the young generation in Japan, a low aspiration generation. You know, we don't want development, we don't want more infrastructure, we don't want more population. We just want to live a simple life, bicycling in our countryside. But what they overlooked is, if we don't move forward, we will be left behind. Currently, they still have an easy life because our government has a massive reserve, a lot of money in our treasury. We can afford to top up minimum wage. You know, we can afford to provide a lot of welfare benefits. But in 20 years' time, with aging population, we won't be able to afford that. But not all young people in the 20s and 30s are like what you described, low aspiration, low ambition. Actually, the achievement gap, the aspiration gap is pretty wide. You still have some very high achievers who want to reach out, who want to get to the top, and who want to stay competitive. You know, it is the business of our government to bridge the gap.
Talking about the young people, Mrs. Yip, I'm sure you are very familiar with the work of the police force and the security in Hong Kong because you've been working for decades on that. What do you think about an apparent conflict between the young people, or at least some of those young people in Hong Kong, and the police force last year?
The young people who got involved in violent acts in Mong Kok and during Occupy Central, a lot of them are actually those engaged in low skill. You know, some of the young people charged, they are transport workers, cooks, typically, just like young people in other parts of the world who get into trouble. They work long hours, they do tough manual work, and sometimes they explode, you know. But so on the one hand, while we need to provide more opportunities for young people, our justice system also need to produce sufficient deterrence to make sure such young people don't step out of the line.
What deterrence are you talking about, Mrs. Yip?
Those who have broken the law, they ought to be brought to justice. And our justice system is slowly coming to grips with that because take Occupy Central, hundreds of people have been involved. The Mong Kok riots, also large number of young people. Our Justice Department is step by step taking prosecution action against them.
What about the police force? There have been so much debate in Hong Kong, even beyond, about whether the police in that specific case have been properly handled, or the punishment for them, whether it's justified or not. What do you say?
I think under no circumstances can the authorities condone law enforcement officers breaking the law, even though many of them did act under extremely stressful circumstances, you know. My sympathies go out to all those who have been charged, you know. But I don't think we can quarrel with the courts about the judgment or the sentences. But I think the tremendous contributions made by the police force in the past few years in upholding law and order must be recognized. They've gone through a lot, you know, they've taken on a lot of stress and insults, and they've really done a lot in upholding the stability of Hong Kong.
You have been tough. I mean, tough in terms of surviving politically in Hong Kong. What is it that it takes a woman being toppled down on several occasions by different factors and always try to get back once again on her feet?
Well, I think I'm by nature a workaholic. I can't stand still, you know. I like being busy. I like keeping
that
myself busy.
That is decided by nature. Is that what you're saying, Mrs. Yip?
Partly so, and also because of my love of Hong Kong. You know, I was local born and bred. I benefited from Hong Kong's prosperity. I benefited from the opportunities from the reunification. Without the reunification, I wouldn't have made it to be Secretary for Security, you know. So I thought I should help our young people, you know, help our city continue to grow. In fact, that's the aspiration. That's not only my aspiration, also the aspiration of fellow graduates of my generation to do something for our city.
You have been accused by some of your opponents earlier in different campaigns as being too directly talking and using the tough words against so-called the public, and also always speak your mind, even not even diplomatic enough.
Those accusations were made against me 13, 14 years ago when I was handling the Article 23 legislation.
That's true.
Since then, I have gained more experience and learned to handle public communication with more skills. I think anyone who wants to survive in government and politics need to learn that, you know. And I think I've come a long way. I no longer speak in the tactless way that I used to when I was 13, 14 years ago. I've learned my lessons, you know. How you sell is just like in business. How you sell a product is very important. It's more effective to soft sell rather than to hard sell. My principles remain the same, but I no longer talk in the same way.
Opportunities or challenges. This year is the 20th anniversary of the return of Hong Kong under the principle of one nation, two systems. Over the past 2 decades, the central government has kept the policy so that the special administrative region remains on the track of prosperity and stability. Although Hong Kong has gone through many setbacks and challenges. After reunification, despite efforts of the HK SAR government, it still faces the problem of institutional reforms and political disputes which severely affected the region's social stability. The implementation of Article 23 of the Basic Law caused so much social controversy, the Hong Kong government suspended this article in order to keep stability, which is considered a major setback in the Hong Kong system. In addition, the occupation that took place in 2014 led to 7 Hong Kong policemen being sentenced to prison for attacking the movement. It's a verdict that stirred more controversy and shook HK SAR stability. Hong Kong is at a critical turning point, especially this year, which coincides with the election of the region's new chief executive. What will happen to Hong Kong politics after Carrie Lam takes office?
The greatest sensitivity now in Hong Kong is with the continuous rise of our motherland, you know. There's a sense of reversal of role. There are a lot of Hong Kong people who used to feel superior, frankly, superior to mainlanders. Now it's the other way around. Mainland visitors, they're far wealthier than Hong Kong people, far more competitive, a lot of highly educated elites working in the top jobs in our city. So there is a sense that we are losing out, even a sense that we are being belittled. So a Hong Kong leader must speak in a way to the Hong Kong people so as to restore their confidence and to give them hope.
What about that? I mean, Hong Kong SAR government, even though we talk about them a lot in the headlines, they are really new, only 20 years, very new government. What do you think the different generations of the administration in Hong Kong or SAR government have been their lessons that we should learn today, including many of our colleagues right now in the government?
Firstly, governing Hong Kong is far more complex today than in the before 1997, because now we have democratic development, we have regular elections. If you look at elections in the West, look at UK, you know, look at USA, look at France, you know that whenever you have referenda or elections, there will be an explosion of public demands, aspirations, all the hidden conflicts and tensions will come to the fore, you know. So officials have a lot more to handle than in the past. That's point number one. Secondly, you see, in Hong Kong historically, it's an economic city. The best people go into business, all the professions. People who want steady jobs go into government. So we have really a dearth of people who are really committed to politics and governance, you know, who are willing to jump into the frying pan, irrespective of salaries, irrespective of possible personal insults, loss of privacy and freedom. So that's why it's been very hard for our incoming chief executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam, to find sufficient people, good people, willing to serve in her cabinet. She said it has been a nightmare.
I understand you have been, after some government work, went abroad and studied literature as well as doing research about democracy systems around the world. I wondered what have been some of the takeaways you got from the academic studies, and you think that Hong Kong could, in a way, try to digest and apply?
Well, the democracy scholars in Hong Kong, they look down on our democratic system and shine in the basic law because it is a limited system. It is a system appropriate to our status as a special administrative region, not a country. You know, we cannot have a democratic system which cuts off the central authorities. You know, we cannot have a system which is appropriate to an independent country but not appropriate to Hong Kong.
There are those that do not agree with you about what kinds of a democracy system Hong Kong should apply. What do you think at the end of the day is the basic principle of this debate?
I think the core issue is whether you're willing to stick to the basic law. In effect, whether you're willing to accept Hong Kong's status as a special administrative region of China rather than do what you please, you know. That is really the crux of the question. But I think most Hong Kong people regret our inability to pass the chief executive election package back in 2015. If we had passed that, we would have had universal suffrage a couple of months ago.
People are looking at, particularly from outside Hong Kong, the efficiency of Hong Kong, which has been the crystallization of the spirit for Hong Kong over the decades.
Yeah.
But it seems that things are being debated and debated and debated, and without much result. Whether it's building an art gallery or try to refurbish a street or, you know, try to build some housing for the common people. Worry about that? Or this is a necessary learning process of democracy in Hong Kong? Do you need to pay a price for it?
We are already paying a price. For example, our public works project, public works budget for the year is 100 billion Hong Kong dollars. But so far we spent maybe only 10 billion, a tenth of that. We've only approved maybe just 10 billion. You know, and that deeply affects our construction industry. And really, it's because with democracy, we now have filibuster. That is drawing out the discussion process in electrical, so that in the past we used to be able to approve one item in 40 minutes. Now it takes 3 hours, and that's slowing Hong Kong down. A lot of us are very worried. The business community is very worried.
Is there a way to solve it?
Not at the moment, except by moral suasion, you know, by telling the public, you know, that we can't carry on like this, you know. Getting more common sense into my colleagues in the Legislative Council who like to indulge in filibustering, use public pressure to get our legislators to change tack. It's very hard to change the system. That's a very big price we pay for democracy.
That's true. Having said that, though, Mrs. Ip, Hong Kong is moving on 20 years already. And you
Yes.
personally in Hong Kong, serving in and out of the government, all of these rich experience and dramatic days have make you who you are today.
The most traumatic experience for me is the controversy over enactment of national security legislation. You know, the mass protests against Article 23 in 2013. For me, naturally, the most traumatic and dramatic experience. You know. It's also my deepest regret that after 20 years, Hong Kong still not able to honor this constitutional obligation. I think if we want the central government to give us universal suffrage, honor their promise, we also need to honor our obligation. And I hope the new government, the new administration, will be able to achieve that.
And about yourself, your daughter was born at the late 80s. You know, Hong Kong future is going to be hers and her peers. At the end of our show and interview today, anything you want to say to her and her friends?
In fact, I'll tell you what she's been telling me.
Okay.
She's been working in Shanghai. She's been working in Shanghai in a very competitive environment. And where she is concerned, the market is most, she will go where there is a big market. It means our country.
Flow to the place where there's more space to exercise your talent.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Regina
More
Ip.
opportunities.
All the best to you and your family members.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. That's Regina Ip, the co-founder and chairwoman of Hong Kong's New People's Party. Stay tuned for the coming episode of our special series, Trailblazing Hong Kong Women. Through these interviews, we offer you a new and feminist perspective to the city of Hong Kong. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight with Tian Wei, CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.